Africa is moving on to cloud speedily. PwC Africa's cloud business survey indicates that half of the companies on the continent have already adopted cloud capabilities. Over 2 years, this is expected to jump to over 60%. In a world of emerging technologies, generative AI and advanced analytics, along with industry clouds. What do some of these trends suggest for the continent on this front? Mark Allderman, cloud and digital leader at PwC SA, joins us with the detail. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. Let's start off with the basics. A lot of us aren't techies, and we've basically gone to the same level as our parents in terms of tech knowledge. What are we talking about when we talk about the cloud?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'll try not to use too much jargon, but I mean, typically we look at cloud across a couple of levels. I mean, there's the boring stuff where you'll hear about shifting workloads to hyperscalers. That's where people are taking their existing large finance systems, banking systems, etc., and they're moving them from their on-premise systems into the cloud. That's probably as I say, the bottom boring part. Then there's a really cool, exciting part, which you've probably heard of more around software as a service. So that's where a whole bunch of very innovative techie people across the globe, and very excitingly in Africa, I think significant growth about driving software as a service, and even things like ChatGPT, that's been all the hype over the last year. That's the sort of top end of the solutions, and very much also being able to take in large amounts of data and give you cool apps that will tell you how bad the traffic is or when your meal's going to arrive. So those are the sort of different levels.
So Mark, let's also talk then about how a cloud is driving business and industry around the world, and maybe bring it home here to Africa, speaking on issues of pace and maturity.
So quite exciting for us. So just maybe to step back a little bit, we released the survey late last year and we had respondents from about 2,200 companies across EMEA, Middle East, Europe, Africa. And quite excitingly for us was there were 155 responses across Africa, including South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. So we're really quite excited that we got a good insight across the African market, and we're able to compare that to what the compatriots were doing in the broader sort of EMEA. And exciting for us, a lot of the trends are very aligned. We're really not far behind the rest of the globe as well, which is exciting, and actually in some areas even leading. The key drivers, I always talk about the fact that the cloud's been here for a while, but we really are hitting the tipping point. That tipping point probably started, if a tipping point can start, at the pandemic. And the pandemic certainly forced us into the cloud. But we're also seeing organizations adopting cloud for a bunch of reasons. I mean, we as users of technology have massive expectations. It must look and feel like Facebook, Instagram, etc. It must be there. Our bank must look exactly the same. So our increasing expectations, the availability of data, you can't process those vast amounts of data without cloud. And then the last thing I think also just to mention, I mean, there are a bunch of other drivers, but the last thing to mention is also the availability of these technologies. In Africa as well, there wasn't such ubiquitous availability of hyperscaler capability, but in the last 2 to 3 years, they've all started to invest now across Amazon, Microsoft, Google. The presence and availability of solutions is massive, and I think that's driven very much the trends that we've seen.
Yeah. Mark, what are some of the key things that organizations need to keep in mind, those that are beginning their cloud journeys and the ones that are already in it?
Very much, it's a great question. Very much you need to be absolutely clear on your business strategy. You need to be able to relate the technology to your business strategy. You need to be really clear around where your organization is going and what the solution can do for you. So it's being clear around what software as a service solutions will help you with your sales and your onboarding and servicing, for instance, and will moving your current technology into the cloud save costs, increase flexibility, etc. You need to be really clear on that, because there's pros and cons to all of it. And particularly what we saw in Africa, the hindrances towards moving to cloud were some concerns around cybersecurity, around data sovereignty, etc. Also, you're now embedding another service provider into your organization. So you've got an Amazon or a Google or a Microsoft that now becomes a massively key player in your organization. I think a lot of companies have grappled with that, but certainly scaling out of it. The last thing for me, just to mention as both a hurdle, but it has a positive aspect to it, is the whole availability of talent. It requires very different skills, and organizations are struggling to get in the talent that can manage the data, manage the software and the ways of developing and supporting that software, a key concern. But for me, just to mention that point, I think the opportunity we have in South Africa and across the African continent is being able to start to grow and nurture those skills into our own continent, but also more broadly.
Mark, I actually want to touch also on the size of an entity and how that may affect cloud needs. You speak of skills. It also speaks of issues then of architecture and analysis that may be super complex. Is there a size of an entity where, cloud should really be considered? And I'm thinking here of a continent that has lots of SMMEs that are thriving and growing and may talk themselves out of embracing cloud technology.
It's a very good question, and I think for me, you've got to look at it broadly. I think the exciting thing about cloud is it's really allowed those small, 5-man operations, 1-man operations to scale rapidly. Because in the past, it required a large corporate to be able to invest in mainframe technology and the data and all of the skills to be able to build and scale. Now you've got access to that capability at a much lower price point, and the availability of the technologies is much easier. You can implement these technologies much quicker, and it allows those smaller organizations to get into the market and compete with some of the big organizations on an equal footing, which for me is massively exciting. And we've seen some of these organizations mature, overnight in some cases.
Yeah. Would you say that there is sufficient technological infrastructure to support the adoption of cloud, or there could be more that could be done?
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier on, I think that's, again, a key question across Africa. And there's been a number of reasons for that. In the early days of cloud, there was a concern around, again, I'll try not to be too techy, but around the network latency. So if you had to log in somewhere in the middle of Africa, you might have slower response. So there was a tendency not to go to cloud. But recently, those have improved. We've seen Google Cloud Platform launched in South Africa recently. They're going to make a push into Africa. We've seen massive investment through, as I say, the other service providers. So those capabilities are there. And certainly, if you look in the sort of West market, Nigeria, the East market in Kenya, the capabilities in those countries has scaled. In some cases, seeing what's available in Kenya is flabbergasting, and the innovation that's coming out of those regions is amazing. And a lot of that is built on the availability of development environments enabled by cloud.
Well, Mark, an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. It's been fantastic learning and hearing all about these developments. That was Cloud and Digital Leader at PwC South Africa, Mark Allderman.